Imagine the smell of burning metal before you see the fire. That is the only way I know how to begin this account. Not with the sensor readings, not with the official incident log timestamp, not with the 17 committee reports that followed. With a smell, with the particular sharp rod of superheated, copper alloy and scorched coolant that reached the command deck of Salvage Arbitration Station Velkorath. 4 full minutes before any of my instruments registered an anomaly. 27 years in this work. I have overseen the decommissioning of warships, the cataloging of plague vessels, the certified destruction of weapons platforms so dangerous that 3 separate hegemony treaties required their elimination. I have sat in this chair through ion storms that cracked hull plating like dried leaves. I have signed death certificates for beings far braver than myself. I had never smelled a battleship waking up before. My name is Commodore Veth Saran of the Kilvari Salvage Arbitration Authority. What I am about to tell you is a matter of public record now, available in any hegemony archive that has not yet been quietly sealed. What is not in those archives is the truth of what I felt during those hours, what I thought, what I came to understand about a species we had filed, cataloged, and dismissed as cargo-class intelligence for 300 years. I am telling you because someone should, because the galaxy deserves to know what we almost didn't survive, and because I think about her face sometimes in the dark between sleep cycles, and I wonder if we should be grateful or afraid. The IHV Unbroken Dominion had been dead for 60 years. It had been a Pride-class dreadnought once, built during the second Kilvari expansion, when our engineers still believed that larger was the only answer. 7 kilometers of reinforced iridite hull, 24 antimatter projection batteries, crew capacity for 4,000. It had fought in 3 major engagements, earned 17 battle commendations, and then been quietly retired when the Pride-class line proved too expensive to maintain and too slow to maneuver in modern combat doctrine. For 6 decades it had drifted, in the designated legacy vessel zone at the edge of the Velkorath approach corridor, a monument, a ghost, listed on star charts as navigational hazard and heritage site simultaneously, which is the kind of bureaucratic contradiction that only the hegemony could produce with a straight face. 2 months ago, by hegemony standard calendar, the authority put it up for certified scrap auction. This is routine. Ship's age. Materials have value. The process is clean, documented, and boring, which is precisely how we prefer all things in the salvage arbitration business. No one bid. I reviewed the auction results myself. Not one registered salvage operator, not one recycling consortium, not one scrap broker in the hegemony's entire licensed network placed an offer. The Unbroken Dominion was too large to break down profitably with modern equipment, too old for its components to have standardized value, and too structurally degraded for anyone to consider restoration. The antimatter core was listed as, quote, residually active but below operational threshold, end quote, which is salvage bureaucracy language for, it probably will not kill you. Probably. We reduced the opening bid to symbolic value. 1 credit, then 2, then 5, with a processing subsidy attached, because we needed the docking space and the Heritage Committee had finally agreed to release the designation. She bought it for 5 credits. I did not know that at the time. When the automated auction system flagged a successful bid, I was in a budget review meeting with 3 Duresi trade delegates who smelled of wing musk and politely obvious contempt for everything my office represented. I initialed the transfer, noted the buyer was a registered independent broker operating out of the tertiary reaches, and returned to arguing about storage fee schedules. Her name appeared on the transfer document as McAllister, Monsieur Licence Class Independent Commercial, Subclass Salvage Recovery, Subclass 2 Restricted, which meant she was licensed to buy scrap, not to operate it, not to fly it, certainly not to bring it anywhere near a populated station. I want to be precise about something. I am not a being who holds cultural bias as a point of pride. I have served alongside Duresi, Janrik, beings of 17 different classifications, and I have endeavored in each case to assess capability on merit rather than assumption. But when the secondary flag appeared on the transfer 3 days later, indicating that the buyer had filed a transit plan to bring the Unbroken Dominion under limited tow to Velkorath Station for processing, and when I looked up the buyer's species in the file, and the species field read human, I felt something I am not proud of. I felt amused. We had 41 humans in the station's commercial registry at that time. 41. Out of a registered population of approximately 14,000 beings. They ran small operations, courier services, repair contracts for equipment that other species found too awkward or too hazardous to maintain themselves. One woman ran a food stall on level 7 that was inexplicably popular with Kelvari dock workers, despite the fact that humans and Kelvari do not share even adjacent nutritional biology. They were harmless. They were cheerful in a way that slightly unnerved me when I thought about it too long, which I generally avoided doing. They filled the spaces that other species found inconvenient, and they did not complain about it. And as a result, most of us had developed a comfortable theory that they were simply built for inconvenience. Good-natured, adaptable, useful, in the way that a multi-tool is useful, without anyone expecting it to perform surgery. I approved the transit plan. The next 17 days were agony. Not for me, not yet. For my junior coordination officer, Ensign Tev, who had the misfortune of being assigned to monitor the unbroken Dominion's inbound transit, and who therefore spent 2.5 weeks watching a 7-kilometer dead battleship lumber toward us at approximately the speed of bureaucratic reform. Tev is young, even by Kelvari standards. His scales are still the pale green gold of early maturity, and his throat sacs pulse blue when he is anxious, which during this period meant they were almost continuously illuminated. He filed 14 routine queries to the broker. She answered 11 of them. The 3 she did not answer were the ones asking for her operational crew manifest, because she did not have. 1. Mara McAllister was flying a 7-kilometer decommissioned dreadnought alone. I did not learn this until she was 6 hours out from our outer approach marker, at which point Tev came to my office at a pace that I can only describe as controlled panic, his throat sacs blazing a color I had never seen on a Kelvari before or since. Something between emergency amber and the particular blue-white of an antimatter warning light. "Commodore," he said, "the broker on the Dominion." I finally got her to pick up a direct channel. "And?" "She is alone, sir." I stared at him. "Clarify alone. No crew. No assistance." "She has been alone since she took the tow cables off at the edge of the reaches and started the approach burn." He paused. "She said, and I want to be precise about this," she said. And I quote, "It is fine, I have done stupider things for less money." The Duresi have a concept in their diplomatic tradition. They call it the moment of recalibration, the instant when a situation you thought you understood reveals itself to be something entirely different, and your mind must choose between the comfortable old map and the terrifying new territory. I was having that moment. Pride-class dreadnought requires a minimum operational crew of 800 for basic maneuvering, not combat. Not full systems, simply moving the ship safely. The navigation alone requires a dedicated team of 12 specialists and a navigational AI with at least 4th generation processing capability. Mara McAllister had apparently been doing this with herself and whatever computing equipment she had brought in her personal transport, a tertiary reaches cargo hauler registered as the second-hand opinion, which was docked in the Dominion's original shuttle bay. I told Tev to get her on the channel. Live. Now. What followed defied explanation. The voice that came through was unhurried, warm, faintly distorted by the Dominion's old communication array, which I later learned she had patched into her own equipment, using methods that 3 of my engineers described as, and I quote, "not how anything works, Vel Karath control. This is the IHV Unbroken Dominion. Or I guess technically I am, since I own it now. Go ahead." My first officer, Commander Shalveth, who has 23 years of experience and has never in my presence made an unprofessional sound, made a noise somewhere between a cough and a question. I said, "Broker McAllister, our records indicate you are operating this vessel without registered crew. Please confirm." "Confirmed," she said. "Solo operation." It is honestly not as bad as it sounds. The old girl has good bones, the old girl. She was referring to a 7-kilometer warship that had fought in 3 galactic engagements. As the old girl. Broker McAllister, a Pride-class dreadnought requires a minimum of 800 crew for basic approach maneuvers. Our traffic control protocols require a crew manifest before we can authorize final approach. There was a brief pause, the kind of pause that I would later come to recognize meant she was deciding how honest to be. Right, she said. So here is the thing about that. Here is what she told us. In the cheerful tone of a being describing mild inconvenience, she had grown up in the tertiary reaches, in a family that ran an asteroid mining and demolition operation. Her childhood had been spent learning, as she put it, how to make large uncooperative things do what you want by understanding them better than they understand themselves. She had spent 6 years doing illegal shuttle racing in the Reach's belt circuits, which primarily meant modifying vehicles with non-standard systems and then flying them in conditions that licensed engineers would classify as certainly fatal. She had then spent 8 years as an independent salvage broker, specializing in vessels that no one else would touch. She had bought the unbroken Dominion because, and I am quoting her directly here, the antimatter core had a residual charge signature that matched an obscure pre-standardization design she recognized from her father's technical manuals, and she thought she could get the secondary systems running well enough to do a controlled self-propelled approach, which would save her an enormous amount in tow cable fees. How is she doing that? Tev whispered beside me, his throat sacs a steady bewildered gold. I did not have an answer. She had spent the 17 transit days rewiring the Dominion's tertiary bridge from scratch, using components from her cargo hauler, her personal equipment, and what she described as a truly impressive amount of tape. She had not slept more than 4 hours at a stretch. She had eaten, by her own cheerful admission, primarily nutrient bars and something called strong coffee, which she mentioned 3 separate times with the reverence most species reserve for sacred texts. She had navigated a 7-kilometer warship through 17 days of empty space alone, and she had done it because she wanted to save on tow fees. I want you to understand what I was feeling at this moment. I had approved this transit. I had signed the form. I had not thought about it again for 17 days. A human woman in a cargo hauler had been quietly performing what my engineering team would later rate as a top-tier navigation feat, in the dark, alone, and she was now 6 hours from my station asking me politely to update our crew manifest protocols. I told her we would work something out. Great, she said. Fair warning. The forward stabilizers on sections 3 through 7 are a little creative right now. I would recommend clearing the 700-meter approach corridor. Just as a courtesy thing. Commander Shalveth looked at me. I looked at Commander Shalveth. Clear the corridor, I said. The next 6 hours were the most technically remarkable thing I have witnessed in 27 years of service, and I watched them on a sensor display while trying to appear professionally calm and occasionally gripping the arm of my chair with enough force that I later found 4 claw marks in the composite. She brought the unbroken Dominion into Velkorath, station approach corridor with the delicacy of a being, threading a needle the size of a small city. Every adjustment was precise. Every burn was timed. When Section 4's stabilizers did the thing she had described as creative, which turned out to mean firing in a completely non-standard pattern that technically should have sent the bow of the ship rotating into the station's outer ring, she compensated in real time with what my navigation specialist described as a correction burn that did not exist in any certified maneuvering manual and absolutely should not have worked. It worked. Tev, at this point, had given up trying to look professional and was simply watching the sensor display with his throat sac cycling through colors I was not sure had names in any language. She docked at 0347 station time. Went to meet her. This is not standard procedure. A Commodore of the Salvage Arbitration Authority does not personally meet independent scrapbrokers at the docking port, but I had a reason, which was that I needed to see the person who had done this with my own eyes, and a justification, which was that I had several pointed regulatory questions about unlicensed operation of a heritage vessel, and a truth, which was that I was already beginning to suspect that regulatory questions were going to feel very small next to whatever I was actually about to encounter. The port access corridor for the Dominion's shuttle bay smelled of ozone, hot metal, and something I later identified as the human beverage she had mentioned 3 times. Strong coffee. It smelled bitter and sharp and oddly alive. She was sitting on an equipment crate just inside the bay doors, eating something from a foil packet, when I arrived. She looked up. I had reviewed the species file on humans, obviously. They are bipedal, bilaterally symmetrical, visually in the mid-range for hegemony species in terms of size. They have no scales, No bioluminescence, no external sensory structures beyond the pair of basic visual organs and auditory receptors most hegemony species share in some form. By every objective physical measure, they are entirely unimpressive. She was, by human standards, apparently unremarkable. Medium height. Brown hair pulled back in a practical arrangement. A jacket with too many pockets covered in marks that I chose to interpret as grease rather than investigate further. She looked tired in a way that seemed to go past the eyes. The particular exhaustion of a being who had been running on reserves for 2 weeks and was choosing not to think about that yet. She looked at me with those flat-fronted human eyes and she said, "Commodore. Nice station. The outer ring lighting is a bit much at 0347, but I appreciate the welcome committee." I said, "Broker McAllister." "Mac is fine," she said. "Broker McAllister is my paperwork name." I looked at the docked unbroken Dominion visible through the port behind her. 7 kilometers of ancient warship sitting in my dock, put there by one human woman and an unreasonable amount of tape. "I have questions," I said. "I have answers," she said. "Most of them are going to make your engineers upset." "I apologize in advance," she paused. "Do you have anything to eat that is not nutrient bars?" I have been looking at nutrient bars for 17 days, and I'm starting to feel personally offended by them. I took her to the command-level commissary. I had questions about crew manifest protocol violations. I had 17 questions, in fact, filed neatly in my mind in order of regulatory priority. I asked her none of them. Instead, I listened while she explained, between efficient bites of the Kelvari meal my assistant hastily assembled, what she had done and how and why, in the practical and unhurried way of a being describing a straightforward job that had run slightly over schedule. She spoke about the Dominion's pre-standardization antimatter core, the way I might speak about a well-designed filing system. She spoke about the tertiary bridge, rewiring with the mild pride of someone who had solved a puzzle that happened to also be a ship. She never once suggested this was impressive. "The core is the interesting part," she said. "Pre-standardization design means it was built before the hegemony-mandated uniform interface protocols, which means it is honestly more flexible than anything built in the last 40 years. You can talk to it directly if you know the original harmonic codes. My dad had the technical manuals. He collected that stuff," she shrugged. "Took me a few days to work out the translation between the old notation and what my equipment could actually run. But once I had that, the rest was just time. Just time. 17 days alone in a dead warship. Just time." Tev, who had followed me to the commissary and was sitting in the corner pretending to review reports on his data panel, made a sound at that point that I chose not to formally acknowledge. I realized something that kept me awake for weeks afterward. I had sat across from Mara McAllister in that commissary for 40 minutes, and in 40 minutes she had told me more about the Unbroken Dominion's engineering architecture than any of my certified specialists knew. Not because she was showing off, because she was answering questions, because I kept asking them and she kept having answers and the answers kept being correct, and at some point I had stopped thinking about the regulatory violations entirely. She finished eating. She thanked my assistant, whose name is Preth, and called him Preth. Not ensign or officer or young one, which is how most visiting officials address junior Kelvari staff, and which Preth later told me, in a moment of entirely unprofessional candor, had made him feel like a person rather than furniture. She said she was going to sleep for approximately 12 hours, and then begin the formal survey of the Dominion's salvageable systems, and that she would file the required processing paperwork by end of station cycle. I said, "Good night." She walked back toward the docking port with the easy, unhurried stride of a being who had done exactly what she came to do. I stood in the commissary doorway for longer, then was dignified and watched her go. She was on her 3rd day of survey work when the core woke up. Not my phrasing. That is the phrase she used later. And despite the fact that it is anthropomorphic, inaccurate, and would make any of my engineers wince, it is also exactly correct in a way that proper technical language somehow fails to capture. The antimatter core of the Unbroken Dominion had been listed as residually active but below operational threshold. What that listing had failed to account for, because no one had actually physically inspected the core housing in 60 years, was that the containment field architecture on a pre-standardization Pride-class vessel is not static. It is dynamic. It breathes, in a sense. It requires periodic recalibration inputs from the ship's navigation system to maintain field geometry. For 60 years, with no navigation system running, the containment field had been slowly, incrementally, geometrically degrading. When Mara powered up the tertiary bridge systems to run her survey, the navigation system sent its first recalibration pulse in 6 decades. The containment field tried to respond, and the response after 60 years of drift was wrong. My instruments registered the anomaly at 0612 station time, not as an antimatter containment warning. Not initially. It came in as a structural resonance reading in the Dominion's aft section, the kind of low-frequency vibration that usually means hull stress. My duty officer flagged it as a routine notation. The smell reached the command deck at 0616, that burning metal, that scorched copper alloy, that particular sharp rot that my body, 27 years of it trained to this work, recognized before my conscious mind did. I was out of my chair before the secondary alarm triggered. At 0619, the automated antimatter proximity sensor on the outer docking ring registered a field geometry variance of 11% above baseline. At 0621, it registered 23%. At 0623, my chief engineer, a Kelvari named Commander Velroth who had been with me for 11 years, and who I had never seen run anywhere, came through the command deck door at a full sprint. "The Dominion's core," she said. "I know," I said. "The containment field is in cascade variance. If it reaches 40% geometry deviation, we are looking at an uncontrolled release event." I knew what that meant. Everyone on Velkorath Station knew what that meant, in the abstract. The way you know what a star going nova means without ever expecting to be standing next to one. An uncontrolled antimatter release from a Pride-class dreadnought core, docked at an inhabited station, would eliminate Velkorath and everything within approximately 200 kilometers of it, 14,000 beings, the commercial shipping hub for 6 systems, the arbitration records for 300 years of hegemony salvage law. "Get me the broker," I said. Tev already had the channel open. Her voice came through at 624. Not alarmed. Awake because she was already in the Dominion. "Already aware, yeah," she said. "I see it. Give me a minute. Broker McAllister." I was using my formal voice, the one I use when I need every being in the room to understand that the situation is beyond the ordinary. "I need you to evacuate the vessel immediately. We are initiating emergency undocking procedure." Emergency undocking on a vessel that size, with a destabilizing antimatter core in a populated docking corridor, was an option in the same way that removing a structural beam from a burning building is an option. It was technically possible. It would very likely kill her, damage the station, and potentially accelerate the cascade. "You cannot undock her," Mara said, in the tone of someone pointing out that you have left your keys on the counter. Calm, informative. "The cascade variance is already affecting the field boundary geometry. If you break the dock seal right now, you will spike the resonance. It will go critical in about 4 minutes instead of 40. Velroth looked at me. Her scales had gone the pale gold of extreme stress. "How does she know that?" she said quietly. I did not answer, because I did not have one. "Mac." I used her name without deciding to. "What are we looking at?" "Okay." I could hear her moving. Fast, purposeful steps on old metal decking. "So the good news is this is a pre-standardization core, which means the field architecture is actually manually addressable. You can physically recalibrate the containment geometry from inside the core housing, if you know the harmonic codes. The bad news is the access corridor to the core housing goes through the aft engineering section, which is where the structural resonance started, and I'm getting some readings down here that suggest the decking is not entirely trustworthy." "Define not entirely trustworthy," I said. "Some of it has probably fallen," she said. "I will find out in a moment." She had already started moving toward it. "Here is what I want you to understand about the next 4 minutes. My command deck had 17 beings on it, all of them experienced, all of them trained for crisis management. We had procedures. We had protocols. We had a documented emergency response framework that I had personally reviewed 3 months prior. None of it applied to this situation, because our emergency response framework assumed that in an antimatter containment event, the vessel would be unmanned, and we would be managing remotely. There was a human walking into the failing core section of a 60-year dead warship, alone, while the antimatter containment geometry degraded around her, and she was doing it because she was the only being within 200 kilometers who understood that ship well enough to have any chance of doing what needed to be done. I could not stop her. I could not help her. I could do nothing except keep the channel open and listen. At 06227, field variance reached 29%. I heard her footsteps change. Metal on metal, solid and rhythmic, and then a different sound. A hollow sound. The decking shifting under her weight. Yeah, she said. Some of it has fallen. Short sentences now. I noticed it without meaning to. Her voice had changed rhythm. How far? I said. About 6 meters. It is fine. There is a maintenance ladder on the port side. 31% variance. The proximity alarm on the outer ring upgraded to critical alert level. I heard it from the command deck. She heard it too. I know, she said. I am moving. 34%. Tev had stopped pretending to do anything else. He was standing at his station with both hands flat on the console and his throat sacs a solid white that I had never seen before. Every being on the command deck was perfectly still. Listening, I heard a door. Heavy old manual. She was forcing it. The good news, she said, and her voice was slightly strained now, is that the core housing access panel is manual override. No power required. The door opened with a sound like a wound. Mac, I said, containment variance is at 35%. You have less than 8 minutes before we reach 40. She said. 36. I heard her moving inside the housing. Different acoustic. Closer walls. The particular resonant hum of a pre-standardization antimatter containment field, audible even through the comm channel, a sound like the universe clearing its throat. Okay, she said. There she is. What followed defied explanation, and I mean that with the full weight of 27 years of technical experience behind it. I am going to try to describe what she did. I have reviewed the sensor logs with 3 separate engineering teams since. I have read the post-incident analysis filed by the Hegemony Technical Review Board, which spent 6 weeks on it and concluded in formal language that the recalibration method employed was non-standard, undocumented, and should not have worked. She sang to it, not literally. She used a series of acoustic frequency pulses, generated by her own voice, modulating through a handheld harmonic transmitter she had built from components in her repair kit, tuned to the original design frequencies of the pre-standardization containment architecture. The technical principle is sound, for those who know pre-standardization design. The containment field on that class of core is acoustically responsive. It was built that way deliberately, as a manual override backup, in an era before remote systems were reliable. But knowing the principle and being able to execute it, live in a degrading field environment with the geometry shifting under you in real time, requiring constant frequency adjustment by ear, is not something you learn in any engineering program in the Hegemony. It is not a skill that exists in any certified training manual. It is a skill you develop by spending your childhood listening to asteroid resonance frequencies with your father in the dark of the Tertiary Reaches Belt, learning to hear the difference between stable rock and rock that is about to shatter. 36% variance. Her voice through the comm channel. Low, steady, not speaking to us. 35. Still singing, adjusting. I could hear her listening, in the pauses to something none of us could hear. 34, 33. Velroth made a sound beside me, short and involuntary. Her scales had gone a color I do not have a word for in my language. I am not sure any language has a word for that color, because that color is what scales do when a being has been certain something is impossible and is watching it happen. Anyway, 32, 31, 29, 26. I realized I had been holding my breath for an amount of time that was probably medically inadvisable. 22, 19, 16. B. Proximity alarm downgraded from critical. 14, 12, it A. Downgraded again, 9%. Variance, 8, 7 stable. For approximately 4 seconds, the command deck of Vel Korath station was completely silent. Then Tev sat down on the floor. Not in a chair. On the floor. I looked at him and he looked back at me, and I decided that the regulations about maintaining professional composure in a crisis could be retroactively amended to include sitting on the floor after the crisis was technically Over Commander Velroth was gripping my arm. I do not think she knew she was doing it. "Mac," I said into the comm. "Report. Core is stable," she said. She sounded tired. A new kind of tired. The kind that comes after. Field geometry is recalibrated to within 2% of design specification, which is honestly better than factory given how old she is. A pause. "You should probably have someone come look at the decking in aft section 7. Some of it is definitely gone. I did not fall through any of it, but I would hate for someone else to be less lucky." I said, "Are you injured?" "No," she said. Then after a beat, I hit my shoulder on the housing panel pretty hard. "It is fine. Mac, it is fine, Commodore. I have had worse from a loading crate." I looked at Commander Velroth. I looked at the sensor display showing the Dominion's core at 8% variance, stable, contained, not a threat to the 14,000 beings on this station. I said, "Do not move. I am sending a medical team and an engineering escort. You really do not have to. I am sending them anyway." A pause. Then with the particular sound of a smile in a voice. "Okay, fair enough." The engineering escort found her in the aft section 7 access corridor, sitting against the wall outside the core housing door in the dark, because the lighting in that section had failed some years before she was born. She was not alone. This is the part of the account that is not in the official reports. Not because it was hidden, but because no one thought to include it. Because it does not appear in any sensor log, and the only witnesses were my ensign and the medical officer I sent. And when I asked them about it later, they both described it the same way and then were quiet for a moment. Before they continued with their other reports, there was a Kelvari, dock worker in the corridor. His name was Vensol. He was 17 years old, which for Kelvari is very young, newly contracted, had been assigned to the Dominion docking team for his first rotation. When the resonance event began, the structural shift in aft section 7 had trapped him in the corridor access, a section of fallen decking pinning his lower limbs, not catastrophically. He was not mortally injured, but he was trapped in the dark in a corridor where the antimatter containment event was audibly progressing through the walls, and he was 17 years old and he was alone. He was not alone when my team found him. Mara was sitting next to him on the deck. Her shoulder, the one she had described as fine, was visibly swollen. She had her jacket draped over his upper body, because the corridor temperature in that section had dropped with the power failure, and she had her hand on his arm, the particular steady contact that the medical officer described as deliberate, the kind of touch that says I am here, not the kind that says I am worried. She had been talking to him. The medical officer caught the end of it when they came through the door. She was telling him about the asteroid belt, about racing modified shuttles in the dark between rocks that could kill you if you flinched, about how her father had taught her that most things that seemed like they were going to kill you were actually just asking to be understood. And the secret was to listen before you ran. Vensol's scales, my medical officer noted in a separate private report she filed for her own records, had gone from the pale yellow of fear to the steady warm bronze of a young Kelvari who has decided that everything is probably going to be fine. She had done this in the dark, with a damaged shoulder, while the antimatter core 40 meters away completed its recalibration. She was eating the last of her nutrient bars when my team came through the door. "Oh, good," she said. "I told him you would come." She looked at Vensol. "Told you." Vensol looked at my ensign and then at Mara, and then he said something that I was not present for but that my ensign included in his incident debrief. He said, "She is very calm for someone who just saved the station." Mara said, "I saved my investment." "The station was a bonus," she winked at him. I am told this is a human expression of humor. Vensol, who had never interacted with a human before this day, was not familiar with this expression, and his scales cycled briefly through several colors before settling on a shade that the medical officer identified, in her report as apparently reassured. Within hours, the hegemony technical advisory had been notified. Within the day, the report had reached the Arbitration Central Committee. Within the week, I had received formal inquiries from 4 separate hegemony departments, 2 independent research institutions, and the Durresi Diplomatic Assembly, all of whom wanted to know the same thing. How? How had an independent human broker navigated a Pride-class dreadnought solo across 17 days of open space? How had she diagnosed a pre-standardization containment cascade in real time with no sensor support? How had she recalibrated an antimatter core using acoustic methods, while the field geometry was actively degrading around her? How had she known any of it, all of it, in a situation that our finest certified engineers had reviewed after the fact and described as unsurvivable under standard operational parameters? I told them what she had told me. I told them about the asteroid belt and the technical manuals and the illegal shuttle racing and the 17 days alone in the dark. I told them she had done it partly to save on tow fees. The Duresi ambassador, a being who had spent 40 years in the diplomatic corps, and who smelled of wing musk and polished superiority, and who had, in our first meeting, referred to the human commercial registry as, quote, a quaint arrangement, sat across from me in the formal conference room and was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, there are 41 humans on this station. Yes, I said. He said, what else are they capable of? I did not answer, because I did not know, because I was realizing in that moment, sitting across from a diplomat who had built his career on knowing everything, that neither of us had ever thought to ask the question seriously before. The formal honor ceremony was held on Station Day 47. The Hegemony Technical Review Board issued a commendation. The Salvage Arbitration Authority issued a citation of merit, first of its kind for a non-Kelvari operator in the history of the station. I presented it myself, because it seemed important to be present for things that are important, which is a lesson I am still learning. She stood at the presentation in the same jacket. Different grease marks, or perhaps the same ones redistributed. She had her hands in 2 of the approximate 11 pockets. I gave the formal address. I used the ceremonial language. I spoke about service and courage and the preservation of 14,000 lives. She listened with the patient expression of a being who is waiting for something to be over so she can get back to work. When I finished, the assembled officers and station staff began the formal Kelvari honor tone, the low resonant chord that bioluminescence traces along every throat in unison, the sound we make for the dead and the extraordinary. It is not a sound we make for outsiders. I had not made that decision consciously. It simply happened, as if every Kelvari present had arrived at the same conclusion at the same moment without discussion. She listened to that sound. Something crossed her face. Not pride. Something quieter. Something that in the 300 years we had catalogued and filed and dismissed her species, we had not thought to look for. She said, when the tone faded, "Thank you. I should say that I did not do anything anyone else would not have done in the same position. This was not true. No one corrected her. She said, I want to say that Vensol sat with me in that corridor and kept me company. Without that, the second recalibration pass would have been harder. So, she found him in the assembled group. He was standing very straight. His scales the warm bronze that my medical officer had noted, the color he apparently maintained now as a baseline when she was in the room. Thanks, kid. Vensol's scales went full formal gold in front of the entire station staff. Mara put her hands back in her pockets. I am writing this account 3 months after the events I have described. The Unbroken Dominion has been partially decommissioned as contracted. 3 of its salvageable systems have been sold through the formal arbitration process, yielding Mara McAllister a sum that my financial officer described with obvious discomfort as extremely disproportionate to the original 5-credit acquisition price. She is gone. She filed her final processing report, collected her fee, thanked Preth by name, told Tev his throat sacs were a very nice color, and departed on the second-hand opinion for the tertiary reaches 3 weeks ago. She did not say she would be back. She did not say she would not be. Vensol asked me on his second rotation if I thought she would return to Velkorath. He tried to ask it casually. His scales gave him away. I said I did not know. He nodded and returned to his work, and I returned to mine, and we did not discuss it further. But I noticed that he began keeping his personal station in the docking bay nearest the approach corridor. And I noticed that he began reviewing, in his off hours, a set of technical manuals, pre-standardization design, the kind that most engineers consider obsolete. And I noticed that when I asked him about them, he said, with the careful understatement of a young Kelvari who is choosing his words, they seem worth understanding. He had met her for 4 hours. Most of that time was in the dark in a damaged corridor. waiting to be rescued. He had already changed the direction of his career. I think about that. I think about the 41 humans in our commercial registry, and the 14,000 beings on this station, and the Duresi ambassador's question sitting unanswered in the conference room. I think about pre-standardization manuals and illegal shuttle, races and nutrient bars eaten with the cheerful practicality of a being who has learned to treat disaster as routine. I think about what it means that she bought a warship for 5 credits because she recognized something in it that no one else thought was worth looking at. I think about all the spaces in this galaxy that other species find inconvenient, all the corridors no one wanted to walk down, all the ships no one else would touch, all the situations filed under unsurvivable by every certified expert who reviewed them. I think about 41 humans filling all the spaces we leave empty, learning all the things we considered not worth learning, building skills in the dark that we have no names for and no manuals to describe, for reasons that seem small and practical and personal, without anyone watching and without anyone asking. We had looked at them for 300 years and seen harmless. We had looked at them for 300 years and seen cheerful. We had looked at them and seen beings who were good at inconvenience, and we had found that comfortable, and we had never once asked what inconvenience looks like from the inside, what it builds over generations, in the people who are handed the hard jobs and the broken ships and the 5 credit problems and expected to be grateful. I reviewed the commercial registry this morning. 41 humans. Same number as before. I looked at each file, really looked the way I had not before. Courier licenses and repair contracts and the woman on level 7 with the food stall. Small operations. Unglamorous work. The spaces between the spaces. I found in the file of the level 7 food vendor a note I had never seen before because I had never looked closely enough to see it. A secondary qualification, filed 3 years prior, never relevant to her station work, therefore never surfaced by automated review. Certified demolition specialist. Class 1, former military. 12 years service running a food stall. I sat with that for a long time. Then I looked at the next file, and the next. We had opened our doors to them and found them harmless and helpful and small, and we had called that wisdom. We had welcomed wolves and called them sheep, and